Good. Do you feel good?
I do. I just finished treatment last week, so I'm a little bit under the weather. But other than that, as I mentioned, I think the last time we did this, these events energize me. They give me purpose, and that purpose gives me energy. And so I'm really excited to be back with you again.
Yes, yes. And that's the energy like we need because as we're discussing, it's been cold and quiet. So, sometimes we don't have the energy to do much when it comes to the cold in opposed to the warm weather. But I do welcome you. And I know that you highlighted our previous conversation. For those who may not know, bring us up to speed and share your story briefly before we get into what we're going to talk about today.
Sure. So I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I'm the oldest of three boys. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6 foot 8 inches tall and actually went to college at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina on a basketball scholarship. When I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. I was actually the first person in my family to graduate from college, and I was looking for that first job. The good news was I found it in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain in their marketing department. The bad news was I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. After Wendy's, I actually went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. Then, at 37 years of age, I made a major pivot in my life and became a police officer. And part of what I did during my law enforcement career was I was a SWAT hostage negotiator. After that, started a school security consulting business, coached girls high school basketball. But for the last almost 13 years now, I've been battling a rare form of cancer, a rare form of melanoma. And I've had all kinds of fun things through that. I've had my leg amputated, my foot amputated. I still have tumors in my lungs, which I'm being treated for. And I guess just finally, then my wife and I have been married for 31 years. We have one child, a daughter who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
Beautiful, beautiful story. Thank you, Terry, for that. So today we're going to talk about the four truth, and you mentioned some of it, which is a part of your life now. But there's one that actually was very important to me, but I don't want to spoil it because it's your story. So tell us, what are the four truth and how does it impact your life and how does it impact the lives of others?
So the four truths are, and just for full disclosure, I was on a podcast as a guest that was titled The Three Truths. And I thought, well, I better codify those for myself. I better understand what those truths were. So I really did. I spent some time, I took it pretty seriously. What is foundational for me? What is a bedrock thing for me? And I came up with these three truths. And then the more I read, the more I grow, the more I mature, I'm like, you know what? There's another one I've got to add. So I'll give them to you. I have them here in my office. They're on a post-it note, so I see them multiple times, and they're just one sentence each. So the first one is control your mind, or your mind is going to control you. The second one is embrace the pain and the difficulty that we all experience in life and use that pain and difficulty to make you a stronger and more resolute individual. The third one, and this is the one that I added because I look at it more as a legacy type of truth, and it's this: what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of other people. And then the fourth one, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. As long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. And like I said, I look at these four truths as things that are foundational. And for me, I think they're just a good place to try to start to build a quality life off of.
I'll get the second one. And I think the second one resonates with me just because it's applicable in so many aspects in our lives. It could be applicable work. It could be romantic relationship. It could be relationship with your children. It could be a relationship with yourself. And that is embrace the pain and the difficulty that we experience. And I know that as social beings, sometimes it could be difficult to navigate the world, especially if we're suffering, right? Like, and I know there's some of the things that you've experienced. Which one out of the four resonates with you the most and why?
Well, people used to ask me, is one more important than the other? And initially I was like, no, they're all equally important. And honestly, Terrain, I think the one that resonates most with me, because it is the most important, is the first one. Control your mind, or your mind is going to control you. If you can't control what's going on in your head, there's absolutely no way that you're going to be able to survive this life. You're always going to have a problem. There's always going to be misery. There's always going to be difficulty. And your mind, your mammalian brain is there to tell you, hey, things hurt. This is uncomfortable. Stop doing that. And we listen to it. We're like, okay, sure, no problem. I'll stop doing that. And I'll tell you a quick story. A true story happened back in the 1950s at Johns Hopkins University. There was a professor there that was doing an experiment with rats, and he wanted to see how long the average rat could tread water. And the average rat treaded water for about 15 minutes. And just as those rats were getting ready to sink and drown, he reached in, grabbed them, pulled them out, dried them off, and let them rest for a while. And then he took those exact same rats and put them back into that exact same tank of water that was over their head. And the second time around, on average, those rats treaded water for 60 hours. Now, think about that. The first time, 15 minutes. I mean, it's not like you're going to flunk a test, or your business is going to go under, or your marriage is going to fail. You're going to die. Your life is going to be over. And the second time around, 60 hours. And it taught me two things. Number one, the importance of hope in our lives, that if we know we're doing the right thing, maybe not today, maybe not this month, maybe not even this year, but there's a good chance, if we're doing the right things, that we're going to get to where we want to be. And the second thing it taught me was just how much more our physical bodies can handle than we ever thought they could. We quit, we give up, we give in long before our physical bodies do. And here we're going to come around full circle, because our brains tell us it hurts, it's uncomfortable, and we should stop.
I couldn't imagine losing control of yourself or not having control, especially your mind, right? I like for me, I always say that there's two things I don't want to happen to me. I don't want a lower back injury.
Understand?
Right? And I don't want to lose my mind, because my mind to me is so precious, because you see so many people who've let's say who are going through let's like a brain disorder, right? Or they're having cognitive issues, or maybe like Parkinson's, or they have Alzheimer's. And you see how it's impacted them, their lives. And especially when you knew them one way, and now you're seeing them how they're this way, right? And you gave fantastic examples that you're capable of so much more if you push yourself and work towards it and set a goal. Do you think sometimes that maybe as life gets difficult and we have these four truths, that many of us understand it and realize it, but maybe we're just running away from the work of it?
I think the biggest thing that prevents us from even thinking about being great, or what it means to be great. And I think most people live their entire lives, never contemplate what it means to be great at something purposeful in their life. And I think that one thing is fear. They're afraid. And I know I've done that in my life. I know I've wanted to start a business or get involved in a project, and you kind of pull back and you're like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe I don't have what it takes to be successful. What will people say about me if I fail? That is, and I put this in a chapter in my book. I felt it was so important. That is thinking with our fears and our insecurities instead of using our minds. And whenever I have the opportunity to speak, especially to young people, I always tell them, if there's something in your heart, something in your soul that you believe you're supposed to do, and it scares you, go ahead and do it. Because at the end of your life, the things that you're going to regret are not going to be those things you did. They're going to be those things you didn't do. And by then it's going to be too late to go back and do those things.
Why do you think we allow fear to put us in those types of situations?
Because it's the unknown. It's like, why don't we like to talk about death? because it scares us, because we don't know about it, because it's uncomfortable. But if you go back in history, if you go back to the Stoic philosophers used to have a saying called memento mori. It was a Latin phrase that means remember death, not for the sake of dying, but for what it gives us in living. If we live forever, there would be no urgency to anything. It's like, I'll do it tomorrow. Don't feel like doing it today. I'll get to it tomorrow. And if I don't want to do it tomorrow, I'll do it the next day because I'm going to live forever. Well, as somebody who's had cancer, as somebody who has been diagnosed in 2012 with terminal cancer and was told I was going to be dead in 2 years, life is very precious. So it's very important to me not to procrastinate. It's very important to me to use every minute of that 24 hours that I get today because tomorrow's not guaranteed for me at all. Something could happen and I could be gone. But I want to be able to use what I've been given in my life. We're all here. Viktor Frankl, who was a concentration camp survivor, a Holocaust survivor during World War II, wrote a great book called Man's Search for Meaning. And he talks about how we should not live our life in the abstract, that every one of us has a purpose, a reason that we were put on the face of this earth. And yet, so few people ever even contemplate what that purpose or reason is for themselves.
I think I was in a position where I was trying to figure out my purpose, and it took me a number of years, but I think I went through that period earlier than a lot of other people. I look at like say my peer group at that time when I was trying to figure it out, they weren't even thinking about trying to figure it out. And then once I realized that every single person is on this earth for a reason, whether they identify it or not, or whatever they fulfill that potential or not, that's where I began to shift my life. And part of shifting my life was I had to distance myself from the people that were choosing not to figure it out. And we survive so many things in our life. Like, for example, you survived what you went through, and there's many others that have survived just life in general because life can be difficult. What if someone were to say, because I'm just thinking of the other side, it's easier not to think this way because being unfulfilled, being unmotivated, it's kind of easy in a way. It's kind of comfortable. I could wake up, not shower, not wash my ass, not brush my teeth, and just carry on because my sloth is very comfortable and it takes minimum effort. I do think that maybe some people who are living that kind of lifestyle, in a sense, they're afraid of the change and they're running away from what could be a better life for them.
I don't disagree with you. And you're right. It is easy. And we like easy. We love easy. But if you have even a small amount of grit to try to find your purpose in life and live it, think how much further down the road you're going to be than those people that you just described. That they're not even in the game, let alone on the field, participating with you. I love the quote from Jerry Rice, who was a San Francisco 49er Hall of Famer, who said, "Today I will do what others won't, so that tomorrow I can do what others can't." And I love that. I love that quote from him because you're right. Being successful, being fulfilled, finding your purpose is hard. If it was easy, everybody would do it. Everybody would find their purpose in life. But let me give you, I guess, a way to think about life that's a little bit different. And I got this from a guy by the name of Jeff Wetzler, who wrote a book called Ask. And I believe this is in the book. And I know I've done this, and you correct me if I'm wrong, if you have as well. We set these arbitrary mileposts. We say by the time I'm 28 years old, I want to be making $100,000 a year. Or by the time I'm 33 years old, I want to be married and have a child. Well, whatever it is. And when 28 and 33 come and we haven't made 100,000 and we don't have a child and we're not in a committed relationship, we somehow look at ourselves as if we're a failure. And Wetzler has a different way of looking at life. And I wish I would have known this when I was younger because I probably would have adopted this. He says, look at your life in decades. So he says, in your 20s, do everything. Anything that remotely interests you, jump in and do it. Figure it out. Make mistakes, screw up, do all kinds of dumb things. Not for the sake of doing dumb things, but for the sake of what you're going to learn from that. He said, then in your 30s, find those two or three things that you're passionate about, that are important to you. Maybe it's a family, maybe it's money, but whatever it ends up being. And then he said in your 40s, when you're more mature, when you're more established, when you understand how things work in life, find that one thing and dig into it. And then he says in your 50s and 60s and beyond, you will reap the rewards of what you did in your 20s, 30s, and 40s.
I really like that because I've broken down my life similarly, where my
Okay.
20s, I was trying to figure, like I mentioned, I was trying to figure it out, and it was just strictly survival. Throw it against the wall for sticks, write it down, it
Yeah.
works, right?
Right.
It wasn't until my 30s that's when I was like, okay, I'm beginning to understand this. And I look back and I tell people like when I've been interviewed, and a lot of people are like, well, my 20s were so much fun. I was at my fittest, my healthiest, I was at my best looking. I told them I didn't enjoy my 20s at all. My 20s, I failed so much at so many things. My 30s, I absolutely loved my 30s
Okay.
because I learned so much. The person I am today, I developed because of my 30s. Because if I wasn't able to figure out and survive my 20s, I probably wouldn't be here. And I definitely wouldn't be the man I am now. As I approach my 40s now, to your point, that's when I'm like, okay, I see where the benefits are going to come in. So I'm preparing for it because 50s, 60s, and into the twilight of my life, I know exactly what to expect. But I know there's two people that I know right now. What you described, Terry, and what I described, they're figuring out what they should have done in their 20s in their 40s now. So to some people, maybe like you and us, we look at them like, well, better late than never, right? But there's decades because what they're necessarily should have been figuring out or doing or testing in their 20s, for some reason, they didn't do it in their teens, they didn't do it in their 20s, they did it in their 30s. So now what's happened to some of them is that they want everything. They want the mistakes, they want the lessons, they want the benefits all in this decade. What would you tell them?
That's a lot of living. I mean, it is a lot of living, but you're right. I mean, and I would say that. I would agree with you. I would be like, you know what, better late than never. Some people live their entire lives, never even contemplate the things that we're talking about. So I think absolutely go for it, learn. But you're going to have to live a lot. You're not going to be able to kind of just sit back. You're going to have to do a lot of living, and you're going to have to make a lot of mistakes. And I always say this: it's not mistakes for the sake of making mistakes. It's mistakes for what you learn and then can apply to what is purposeful in your life. And I'm going to say something now that if nobody listening to us remembers anything about what we say for however long we're on, remember this. Remember this for the rest of your life. It's more important who you work with and who you work for than it is the work that you do. Find people that care about you, find people that are willing to invest in you, find people that want to see you succeed, and hitch your wagon to those people and climb your mountains together.
How would someone go about finding those type of people?
I think it kind of goes back to understanding, when we talked about the four truths, what are your values? What is foundational in your life? What is that rock that you're anchoring your life to? So what are your values? What do you hold so dear? Is it your family? Is it your work? Is it your faith? What is it in your life? What are those things that you find foundational? And then you've got to decide, are there other people that are doing the same thing I'm trying to do? Are their values aligned with mine? It's kind of that old saying that we've heard countless times. You're the product of the five people you hang around with the most. If you hang around with people that are smarter, that are financially better off, that are constantly growing and developing, you're going to be smarter. You're going to be better financially off, and you're going to be constantly growing and developing versus the people that hang around with it's all about drama. Nothing's ever good. There's always the negativity. You're going to turn into that kind of person. So find those people that align with your values, that are going in the same direction that you're going, and then hitch your wagon to those people. And it's amazing. We never do anything in this life, and I think you would agree with me, in a vacuum. We need other people. If COVID taught us anything, it's how horrible things were when we were by ourselves. We are social beings. We need other people to be happy, to be successful, to be fulfilled in life.
I shared that with someone because I was reading an article where they're talking about how some people suffer grief in different ways because a lot of times people think grief is when someone passes away. And I was sharing that grief can be that you've lost your identity. And to your point, right? Like if you're around people that aren't necessarily building you up towards your ultimate goal, because as you mentioned, right, work with and work for, instead of always being negative and dysfunctional and things like that, you may enter a crisis because as you begin to succeed, you're no longer able to identify with the people that you're pulling away from. And sometimes they may respond in a way to bring you back in and disrupt your progress. Because as you said, right, from 2020 to 2022, we learned a valuable and in a lot of ways difficult lesson that being isolated by yourselves doesn't benefit people as a society and as a peer group. So if someone is trying to truly move forward, Terry, and say that I want to fulfill my potential, but you know what? I have these anchors behind me. And by anchors, they're my peer group. They're saying that, oh, why are you working so hard? You haven't been to the club with us. Oh, why you continue to dedicate yourself and read all this information, do all this stuff? We don't like the person you're becoming. How can they determine, at least to themselves, short, medium, and long term, what's more beneficial to them? The person that they know that they should become and they want to become, or satisfying their friends who are trying to maybe hold them back?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as you were saying that, there was a million things running through my mind, and I got to try to stop one of them and talk about it. I guess, yes, it's your peer group, but another big part of that can be your family. And I certainly experienced that with my family. I wanted to follow in my grandfather's footsteps. My paternal grandfather was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. And in 1933, when my dad was 1 year old, he was shot in the line of duty. It was not a serious injury, he was shot in the ankle. But my dad always remembered the stories my grandmother told of that knock on the door of Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us. Your husband's been shot. So when I expressed an interest in following my grandfather's footsteps, my dad was absolutely not. You're going to college. You're going to major in business. You're going to get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after. But that's the fairy tale that my father wanted me to live. And so as I mentioned, when I graduated from college, my dad was dying of cancer. I could have said, "Hey, Dad, no, you're dying of cancer. Sorry, I'm going to go blaze my own trail, going to do my own thing." Or, out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do. So, understanding that sort of backstory, my resume looks like, makes a little more sense than a Super Bowl just went off in a room. Yeah, my first two jobs were in business because that's what my dad wanted me to do. And I sort of joke, I did what every good son did. I waited until my father passed away and I followed my own dreams. And I mean, 37 years old is pretty late to be getting into a line of work like law enforcement, but it was always something I knew I was supposed to do. So I guess you got to decide for yourself how much you want to push back. I mean, my father did what he did for me, not to be mean, but because he loved me. He wanted something better for me. that still didn't align with my values and what I wanted to do with my life. I knew I would do it someday. I just didn't know when I was going to do it. So if you've got people that are holding you back, if you've got people that are sort of the, like you described, those anchors that are preventing you from moving forward, sometimes you're going to have those tough conversations and realize that, you know, we're all good for each other for a period of time. Sometimes it's for a lifetime, but sometimes it's just for a period of time. Maybe when we're in high school, maybe when we're in college, maybe when we're young adults, whatever it is, and you outgrow people. Make sure, especially in a spouse, make sure you don't marry somebody that you're going to outgrow because that's going to make for a very hard relationship. The same is true with friends. If you're going to outgrow those people, you might have to cut them loose for your own benefit, for the things you want to do. You don't have to do it in a mean way, but we all know people who are not good for us, and we need to move those people out of our lives and move in another direction.
I can see that being difficult for some people because not everyone can wait for the passing of a parent,
Yep.
right? Or the passing of a friend. When it comes to the expectations of parents, I could see how a child would want to make their parents happy because I think probably most people will say that or at least agree to that. Well, okay, let me compromise for a little bit, and especially if they're dying. When it comes to like friends or family members, let's say for example, who are closer in age, that if you're gonna wait that long, then it could build up resentment inside you. Like, you know what? They're holding me back because I'm choosing them, and then you don't get upset at them, you're upset at yourself, and maybe you're upset at them as well. Um, but I find, at least I went through this actually last year. I had a friend, we've been friends for about, I want to say 15 years at that point in time. And I've noticed some very destructive changes in him, which was impacting the peer group. So one by one, he started to lose friends, right? And anytime he had the conversation, he'd get more aggressive, profanities. In some cases, he would attack people. So it was very dangerous, not only from a mental health perspective around it, but physical in some cases. And I tried to have this conversation with him, and he wasn't having the same response, very aggressive. And I just said, you know what, at this point in time, this is where I want my life to be, and I should have had this conversation with you a year or two or maybe 3 years ago, but I thought that I had the luxury of time. Unfortunately, I don't. My life is improving, your life is getting worse, and you're lashing out as a result. I'm sorry I didn't do this sooner, but I'm doing this now. This has to change. And like I said, he was very aggressive about it. And the part that I found kind of disappointed in was there is no accountability and responsibility on his end. It was you, them. I hate people. And you sit back, and Terry, I was having this conversation right before I was about to have lunch. And I sat there after he disconnected the phone, and I was like, wow, I am disappointed that the friendship is probably over now. But you know what I was most disappointed in?
What?
I don't want my lunch, right? Because you begin to realize how people like that impact you in so many different ways, right? So if you were looking to help me using the strategy that you've developed, how would you help someone in my situation maybe understand that it will get better? This was maybe necessary, and don't do what some people may do and fall back and say, you know what? No, no, no. Let's go back to the way things were.
That's a great question. And you said something real important. You said, how would I help you come to this understanding? And that's an important thing because I can't solve your problems for you. I can't make life better for you. I can ask you questions. I mean, what does a therapist do? Basically, a therapist leads you to come up with the solution. They don't give you the solution. They don't say, "Here, do this, and you'll be better." They get you to come up with the solution because if there's buy-in from you, I mean, if I just go tell you to do something, you might do it. But if I get you to walk down the path and find that solution, now you're bought into it because you put in the effort to get to that point. So I would ask you questions like, it seems like you have a reason for treating me the way you're treating. And then be quiet. Don't say a word. Let that silence bake into them because we don't like silence. And that silence may stir something up in them that's like, well, because boom. And now they just told you what the problem is. And then you can use what we used to use when I was a hostage negotiator. How and what questions? Well, how does this impact you, Terrain, in what you're doing with your life? And then be quiet. We like to solve problems. I'm going to solve your problem. I can't solve your problem. I can lead you down the path. And I'll tell you another true story that happened to my partner and I when we were police officers. We patrolled a really bad area of Cincinnati, Ohio. A lot of guns, a lot of dope, a lot of crime. Cincinnati usually ran single person cars. We were a double car just because we got all the hot runs. We got all the dope runs, the gun runs, the shootings, the stabbings, the fights, and all that stuff. Well, there was one kid who hung around with all the dope boys. And the dope boys were, 17 to 21-year-old kids that all have felony convictions, all selling crack on the corner. And we pull up on this kid one day, and we had developed this plan. And so as soon as the police pull up, everybody walks. Everybody, I'm moving away. I don't want anything to do with you. I don't want to talk to you. I want to do anything. We grab this guy. We handcuff him. We put him in the back of our car, and we drive him up behind the tennis courts of the high school. Now we work the night shift, so this is about 3 o'clock in the morning. And I'm sure he's like, "What the heck is going on here?" We pull him out. We unhandcuff him. We're like, "You're not in trouble. Just listen to us." Drain, he was not in any criminal trouble at all. He'd never been in any criminal trouble. He drove without a driver's license, which in Ohio was a misdemeanor of the first degree. But all his offenses were driving. So he wasn't a bad guy. And he was a smart kid. And so we said to him this, said, look, you owe the state of Ohio $500 to get your driver's license reinstated so that you have a valid license. My partner and I are willing to pay that for you. Secondly, you didn't complete high school. We have an individual that will work with you to get your GED. And thirdly, we said to him, we have another individual that will give you a full-time job 5 days a week. Now, this job is on the other side of town. It's not here, where you grew up. Will you go for this? Because if you don't, you're hanging around with the wrong type of people. What do you think he said?
A part of me wants to say that he took the offer, but because you tell me the story, it seems like maybe he didn't take the complete offer. So I'm going to be positive and say that he took part of the offer.
He took none of the offer. And 18 months later, he pulled an armed robbery with one of his dope buddies and got convicted and is now a convicted felon. So you can't solve people's problems. You can offer them, hey, we'll offer this to you. I mean, this is your ticket out, but he was raised in that neighborhood. He hung around with these kids that were the dope boys. He grew up with these young men. And that was too big of a pull. It had too big of a hook in him to allow him to escape from that. I mean, it's just like, if you go to drug treatment and then you go back into the same area where you learn, where your dealer is and everything, you're going to relapse. I mean, it's just, it's common sense. So getting him valid with his license, getting him his GED, and getting him a job on the other side of town was totally turning his life upside down. And for a young man, it was just too much for him, and he paid the price for it.
The step that you're asking him to take seems to him like it was a leap,
Oh,
and
huge. Yeah.
it was just too far. And that's that same thing that I experienced with this former friend was I just told him, um, there's something that's going on, and you may want to look into it. To your point, right? You can't say, "Oh, do this, do this, do this," right? You can bring it to their attention, which in a lot of cases they acknowledge, like, yeah, you're right. What you're saying makes sense. But then when you say, okay, I need you to take that step forward. And in your perspective, in your eyes, in my eyes, it's just a step. But in their eyes, they got to jump across a precipice onto the right onto the other side. And for a lot of people, they just can't make that leap and that journey that we ask of them. Do you think then that even though it seems straightforward to us and people like us, that sometimes it can be undervalued how much the advice that we're giving them can be difficult for them to one hear and one to actually do something with.
Yes, I absolutely, and but that's the point. It's not like, you're going to grow the forest. All you're doing is planting the seed. And by allowing that seed to germinate, by allowing you or me to say something to an individual and then just shut up and let them figure it out. What does this mean to me? What did Terry say? What did Terrain say? What is how am I? They've got to do the work. We can't do the work for them. As much as we might like to do the work, we just simply cannot do the work for them. They have to get to that point. And I did a podcast with two cadets at the Air Force Academy, and we were talking about drug abuse and being, going through therapy and stuff like that. And one of the cadets asked me, he said, "Are there programs? Are there things out there to help people who are addicted to, whether it's drugs or alcohol or bad behavior, whatever it is?" I said, "Yeah, there's all kinds of programs out there." But what I said to them is that those programs are only effective when people hit rock bottom. And there's a very fine line, especially in alcohol and drug addiction, between rock bottom and dead. And so you've got to get to that point. I mean, we used to, we'd arrest people with dope and stuff like that. It's like, "Do you want treatment?" "Oh, yeah, I want treatment." And you knew they didn't. You knew they hadn't hit rock bottom yet. They hadn't lost their kids or their parents were still talking to them. I mean, you literally have to get to rock bottom. It's the same thing that you and I are talking about. Those people have to get to where we want them to be, where we know they will be better off in their lives. We can't make them get there. And some people never get there and never will get there. And while that's a shame, again, at the end of my life, God's going to judge me based on what I did, not what somebody else did, sort of in absentia for me. You know what? I'm responsible for myself. We're all responsible for ourselves. I'd love to help people. It's my purpose in life at this point in life. But I also am realistic enough to know I can't help everybody.
And I agree. I think there's some people as they're going through their struggle, they fall like a rock
Mhm.
straight down very quickly. And
Yep.
then some people, it's like a feather, just slow and steady, right? And the problem with that is that if you're looking to help people, like in your example, like in my example, those who aren't hitting rock bottom who aren't there, it can be taxing for us to continue to try to um, help them to identify what is going on because like as you mentioned, you can spend all your time and energy helping this other person, but you're still responsible for you, right? And as you're trying to fix the entire world, how is your house looking like? Right? Is your house falling apart because you're too busy helping others? Are you neglecting your family? Are you neglecting your husband, neglecting your wife, neglecting your kids, neglecting your dog? More importantly, are you neglecting you? Right? And sometimes I see some people get so wrapped up in saying that, okay, you need to get this done, you need to do this, you need to do this. And then it impacts their health. And the person they're trying to help looks fitter than them,
Mhm.
looks healthier than them. Do you see that side as well, where some people take on the trauma they're trying to resolve, and then it also becomes their trauma and their trigger in their life?
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you. I think when I was younger, I tried to solve a lot of people's problems. And it wasn't until I got older and more mature and had some life experience that I was like, you can't. And I mean, and just think about this example. If I gave you a trophy and said, Terrain, nice job, great job, you did a super job. Here's your trophy. Okay, great. Terry gave me a trophy. But if you got up at 5 o'clock every morning and you worked out, whatever we're talking about, whether it's a business thing, whether it's a sports thing, whether it's a religious, whatever it is in your life, if you put in the work, if you put in the grind, and then I said, Terrain, here's a trophy for what you did. Which trophy would mean more to you?
Well, the second one.
Of course. But by me solving your problems, you got no skin in the game. Terry will take care of it. Terry, it's not, I didn't feel any pain. It didn't hurt. The only way we grow in life is through difficulty, is through pain, through being uncomfortable. If things are great, if you're not in pain, if you're not uncomfortable, if you're not doing things that are outside your comfort zone, you are not growing. And if you're not growing, you're dying.
Yeah, one of my friends always says that we're like plants, right? We don't water dead plants, and anything that isn't growing is dead,
Yeah.
right? He was very, very straightforward, and he made a conscious decision. Like once he got up until his marriage, he lived a very, he lived a different life. Once he made that decision and said, I want a family, I want to be responsible, he totally changed. He made the steps. He changed the way he behaved. He changed the way he dressed. He changed his attitude. He changed his state of mind. And the thing is, to my knowledge, because he lives like 5 minutes from me, it was conscious. He didn't go like he would ask people, okay, I see you're successful here. How did you do this? Like he was very inquisitive. And then it became his own. He's married, 2 kids, and he's like the prototype family man, very about the family, right? And I look at him and I acknowledge and I celebrate his success. So every time, every 3 to 4 weeks, we go out for dinner, I acknowledge this. We share each other's successes. When I look back on some of my friends now, or some of the people who I don't have that close of a relationship, there isn't that celebration of the hard work. It's more so, like you mentioned, the first trophy. Here you go, Terry. Why are you giving this to me? Just cause. You know, I
Because
like the
you
way
showed
you,
up. Just because you showed
yeah,
up. Yeah,
just because you
participation
showed up,
trophy.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But the people who are working hard, some of them will actually kind of shame it. They're like, oh, you have a house? Like, house is not an asset. It's just, houses are nothing. Then I asked one of them, I was like, but you live in your parents' house. Imagine if your parents thought, like, they just got rid of the house. Your parents would continue on because they've established themselves. I'm like, you need that overhead. You need that protection. So for you to look down on it, it's kind of strange. So when you mention the 2 trophies now, and you get the second one from the hard work and the dedication, do you think then that some people keep people around who are struggling just so they feel good about getting a trophy that maybe they didn't earn?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think there are people that are so insecure that they hire, say they're the boss. Who are you going to hire? I mean, who should you hire? You should hire people that are smarter than you. You should hire people that know something that you don't know so that you can learn from them. But what do a lot of people do? A lot of people hire people that are needy, that oh, I can keep you under my thumb because you need me. You look at me, you spend your entire life telling me how skinny and pretty I am. I'm not that guy. I don't need you to tell me how skinny and pretty I am. I know I'm not skinny and pretty. I mean, I'm just not. So it's like, okay, why can't I learn from you? And you made another point a minute ago, and it's an incredibly important point. I want to touch on it. I can't remember the word you used, but really what you were talking about was being curious in your life. Always be curious. Always be asking, what, why, how'd you do this? What made you successful? How did you get to the point? How did you develop your leadership philosophy? Whatever it is, we should constantly be doing that. But so many people, I think, get to a point in their life, it's like, yeah, you know what? I'm good. I know enough. I want to die learning. I want to die, one more thing that I'm going after that I want to understand and learn. So many people don't do that. And I mean, it's so gratifying. And I'll give you another quick story. This professor at the University of Chicago, a psychology professor, who does this with his students, does it with himself occasionally, but mostly with his students. The idea is you go out, you get on a bus, and in 3 questions, you're deep with another human being. So you get on a bus, sit down next to somebody. Hey, I'm sitting down next to Terrain. Hey, Terrain, how you doing? I'm good. Okay, question one. Question two, and I'm just making this up. Terrain, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a doctor. Oh, great. Question three. Have you always wanted to be a doctor? Now, no matter what the person says, you're deep with them. They could say, no, I grew up on a farm. I wanted to be a vet, but X, Y, and Z happened. Or yes, my mother died at 40 and she was a doctor and I'm honoring her memory by following in her footsteps. Whatever they say, now you're deep with somebody. Now you're in their soul, why they do what they do in their life. Think about this. This is a class where I have to tell you to go out and get on a bus and try to get deep with somebody. We don't do that naturally. Social media allows us to stay on the surface. Everything's great, everything's fine, everything's wonderful. Everything's not great, everything's not fine. Everything's not. I'm not telling you to air your dirty laundry in public with everybody, but we don't connect with enough people. And 100 years from now, probably everybody who's listening to this, nobody's going to remember we were here. But what I'd like people to remember me for are those connections, those relationships that I had with other human beings along my life's journey.
Would that be a sense of maybe some people don't know if they're going to be able to make an impression on people or leave a legacy, so they're just going through the motions then?
I mean, it's possible. I mean, yeah, we're insecure, so we don't want to hire people. We don't want to be around people that are smarter than us. We don't want to be around people that are better than us. And I was asked actually a couple of days ago on a podcast. It's like, what would you recommend for somebody that was getting married? And I said, well, we could spend hours on a podcast talking about that. I said, but let me give you 2 things. I said, number one, if you're looking to marry somebody, first of all, are your metrics better because that person's in your life? Are you smarter? Do you have a better group of friends? Are you making more money? Are you saving more money? Whatever it is, are your metrics better because of that person in your life? And second thing, would you go to war with that person? Would that person stay by your side when, the bullets started flying, or would they duck and run and get the heck out of Dodge? Would they be there for you in the difficult times? If you can answer yes to both of those questions, now there's a myriad of other things you need to consider, but that would be somebody I would say, yeah, you might want to look at marrying that person. So are we making human beings better in our lives? Yeah, there are a lot of people that, I reached out to and said, hey, this woman who I hadn't worked for in 20 years, the president and CEO of the Henry Ford Health System. She's on the board of Walgreens and the Duke University Medical Center. I said, hey, would you read my book and give me some cover comments? Sure. What's the worst she could have said? No, no, I won't do it. I mean, it's those things that scare you in your life that you should do. Reach out to somebody. I read an article about that guy. Maybe, hey, can we have a cup of coffee? Can I jump on a 20-minute Zoom call, 15-minute Zoom call with you and get 15 minutes of your time to ask you a question? You would be surprised the number of people who you and I would look at that would, oh, they're successful. They would never talk to me. I'm a nobody. That would absolutely get on a phone call with you and make your life better just because you were curious. Don't ever be afraid. We're all human beings. None of us are perfect. And I'll end with this story. I was on a podcast with this gentleman, and he was in the NFL, the National Football League. This guy's like 6'6", like 320 pounds, played for several different teams. His brother is actually in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And we did a podcast together. And after the podcast, we were talking off air. And he said, Terry, when I started my podcast, I didn't think anybody would listen to me. I didn't think anybody would care. I said, Marcus, how could you say that? You've made it to the pinnacle, to the top of your sport. You're a tremendous human being. You're articulate. You've got a degree. I mean, you're everything that anybody would want to be. How could you think that way? So if somebody that's made it to the top of the mountain thinks that they're not all that they're not that important, think about the rest of us that haven't even come close to making it to the top of the mountain. Get involved. Ask people. People are great. They're gracious. And the worst they can say is no.
I think a lot of people suffer from that. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people suffer from realizing that there's something that they're sensitive about, and then instead of maybe trying to turn around that insecurity or that sensitive nature, they try to bury it and hide it. And unfortunately, there's always going to be people that's going to enter your life who enter your life like a mirror, and they will reflect that insecurity, that sensitivity, right? And then when you see it, since because you haven't dealt with it, you haven't understood it, you lash out or you hide from it, you retreat. And in the example you gave, you have someone who is so successful in one area and they doubted they're going to be successful in this area. Understandable because it's two different
Yeah.
areas, right? Of expertise and of skills. But they were willing to try. And I think that takes a lot of courage
Yeah.
just to try. And I think you mentioned this, is that I like to position it as well is I just asked them, if you try and fail, what did you lose? Probably nothing. Yeah, you know what? I got rejection, and maybe some people have a certain feeling about that. But if you tried and you succeeded, imagine the reward. Do you think some people get more comfortable staying where they are because that they know that position like the back better than most, instead of going out there saying that, okay, change is scary, hard work is scary. Do you think that happens to a lot of people as well, Terry?
Oh, absolutely. Small minds and weak people kill big dreams, kill big dreams in their life. There's an entrepreneur by the name of Ed Mylett. 2023 was Entrepreneur of the Year, and I think Entrepreneur Magazine. And he talks about the four types of people in the world that you'll run into in the world. And when I first heard this, I was like, I need to think about this for a while. I need to think if I really believe this. And I'll give them to you. And it's real quick. So the first type he says you'll run into are the unmotivated. And he said that's the vast majority of people you will encounter in your life. And the more I thought about it, Train, it was like, he's right. There's a ton of people out there, they're totally unmotivated. He said the second group are the motivated. He said it's kind of a carrot and stick approach to life. If I do this, I will get that. It's kind of low level, but it is a very effective way for a lot of people to have a very happy and successful life. The third group he talks about are the inspirational people. The word inspiration coming from two words, in spirit. So if you're an inspirational person, you move people with your energy. And then the last group he talks about are the aspirational people, where people aspire to be like you. And sometimes if I'm giving a talk and depending on the audience and what's going on, sometimes I'll tell that story and be like, all right, show of hands, how many people are unmotivated? And nobody raises their hand. Nobody ever raises their hand and says they're unmotivated. But if you believe him, and I don't know if I said his name's Ed Mylett. Mylett says that's the vast majority of people that exist in the world. And it kind of goes back to the Jerry Rice quote, today I will do what others won't. Why won't they? Because they're unmotivated. So that tomorrow I can do what others can't. I am motivated, so I'll be able to do the things that they can't. So I love thinking about that. I mean, I would love to be an aspirational person, but I think also, maybe I'm motivated in this area, but maybe not so much in that area. So it's not kind of a carte blanche where it's one size fits all. I think there are different parts of our lives that we need to examine and say, am I motivated in this area? And if not, why not? And what can I do to get motivated?
I think we find people will always be unmotivated. And I think there's a lot of people. So I do agree that many people are unmotivated because when I look at some of the people I work with, let's say my 9 to 5, or if I look at like the charity, or if I look at like the mentor coach, or if I look at some of the articles I've read on people, it's if they can get away with doing nothing, they will do nothing every day, twice on Sunday. And the reason why I like that four types of people you shared is that I look around and I get inspired by people, right? I get people who, and it's mostly people who have taken something that they've struggled with and overcome it. In a lot of ways, it's simple, right? I struggled with this, I overcome it. I beat an addiction. I stayed sober, right? I like seeing I've been sober 5 years. I've been sober 10 years. I'm raising this beautiful family. That's what I like to see. I used to belong into a WhatsApp group, a peer group, and it was two groups, messaging group. One was people who are mostly in long-term relationships or married, and the other group was people who are chronically single. It wasn't by choice, that's just the way it worked out. So every day I'm getting the contrast of two different worlds. And the people in the long-term relationship group and the married group, they were so motivated and they're inspiring each other. They would share tips. You know what? My child was 2 years old. This is what I did at work. This is how I cleaned their. This is how I change a diaper. This is the resources I use. These are the Facebook groups I have. The people who are in the singles group, in the other group who are chronically single, the only time they got motivated was to bash other people. And although I agree that most people are unmotivated, I think out of that group of people who are unmotivated, if you can get something that they dislike, instantly motivated to dislike it. But if you try to put something into the say, okay, you know what? Instead of taking that energy to not like X, how about you take that energy into liking Y? That's where you see that they're unmotivated. They have no desire to improve, even though you can say that here is Jerry Rice. Look at this quote, amazing. In that same group, there's one guy every morning, and actually I thanked him for this. He sends positive messages. Those positive messages get little to no reaction in that group. But if you send a video, because there's mostly men in that group, if you send a video where it shows that, oh, this woman's a gold digger, she's useless, she's this and stuff, I have to mute the messages. Endless, endless, right? And I shared with someone that interviewed me, and I told them that one of the quickest and most temporary way to unite people is through hate, right? Which is why you have racist group, discrimination group, because you say that I hate this demographic based on this, people flock. But it's short lived because as soon as someone turns away from that group or says, okay, you know what, this thinking is kind of off and move away from it, then they get attacked for being different. You're no longer one of us. Whereas through love, when you love someone and when you come together because of love, that stands the test of time, such as healthy marriages, healthy relationships, healthy connections with people and children. How would you then help people who are trying to understand that you don't have to be in the unmotivated group? Find something that's going to inspire you, that you can be an aspiration, and then move out of that because you don't want to be trapped with these other people.
Yeah, exactly. I guess I would say whatever scares you, whatever you're afraid of, do that thing 100 times. There's a YouTuber, you probably heard of him, called Mr. Beast. And Mr. Beast, basically, people will reach out to him. I mean, the guy does all kinds of interesting things, puts up all kinds of interesting videos. So people will reach out to him and say, "Hey, will you help me?" And he says, "Sure. My only caveat for helping you is that before I help you, I want you to make 100 videos. I don't care how long they are, but I want you to make 100 videos." And what he finds is when the people, first of all, most 90% of people won't make 100 videos. They just won't do it. I mean, and there's a reason why, what is it? 80 or 90% of podcasts fail after 3 episodes because it's a lot of work. I mean, you do this, I mean, it's a ton of work. So they won't make it. And then the people who make the 100 videos, they don't need his help because they figured it out along the way. And I think that's such an important part is that just do it. So I'm gonna tell kind of a weird story now, but hang with me. So there's a guy by the name of Jesse Itzler, and Itzler wrote Living with a SEAL. He brought David Goggins into his house. David Goggins is a former Navy SEAL, guy's ultra marathoner, probably the toughest man in the world, to live with him for a month. But Jesse Itzler, who is also part owner of the Atlanta Hawks and the National Basketball Association, is married to Sarah Blakely. Now, most of us probably, and I don't know who Sarah Blakely was. Sarah Blakely is the founder of a women's undergarment company called Spanx, and it's a 100 million, multi-million dollar company. But Itzler tells this story. He says when she started Spanx, she had one prototype and $5,000. That's it. That's all she had. She had been a door-to-door fax salesperson. We don't hardly even use faxes anymore in our society. But his comment was if she would have waited until she knew about human resources, about marketing, about distribution, about manufacturing, about all these things, he said, I guarantee you somebody else would come up with that idea and taken off with it. His point was wherever you are, just start. Just start there, jump in with both feet, figure it out as you go along. What people don't understand is you're not going to be happy. Life isn't about getting to the top of the mountain. Life is about everything that happens along the way to get to the top of the mountain.
Do you think then that maybe sometimes people don't see that vision and they don't have that foresight, so they don't even try?
Oh yeah. I mean, if you can see something in your mind's eye, we always, hear about our mind's eye. If you can see something in your mind's eye, then it can happen. You can do it. Conversely, if you can't picture it, if you can't see it in your eye, there's not a prayer's chance that it's ever going to happen. You got to see it first.
I had a family member that he really wanted to get into kinesiology because he was a big sports fan, especially football. Like he knew college football, he knew where players went to college, NFL teams, National Football League, and so on. He decided not to do it. And I asked him, I was like, why? Why didn't you get into this dream? Like you talked about it, you love sports. He's like, well, I didn't think I could be the best. So I didn't want to try. I told him, you don't have to be number one to be successful. You can be number two, you can be number five, you can be number 10. He's like, nope, I don't want to do it. So I asked him, is being number two better than where you are right now? He's like, yes. Then why can't you be number two? Why is it that you don't want to work hard to be number two? You rather do nothing and be number 7 billion. He had no answer. Why do you think some people think that way? Where if they have a choice between doing the hard work, but maybe not being as successful as they may want to be, but still successful in itself, they rather not try and continue to live the life that they're living, which is far worse.
Yeah, I mean, one, I think is fear, and we've talked about that already. The other thing, I mean, the way I look at it is you, I mean, I'd almost want to be number two, because it would give me something to strive for. It would give me something, to work for. And, you see so many people, whether it's sports teams, whether it's, orchestras, whether it's businesses, whether it's churches, whatever it ends up being, they work really, 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 really hard and they get to the top, whatever that is, and whoever defines that. And the other thing I would say about that is don't let somebody else define what number one looks like. I mean, you define what number one looks like. You define when you're at the top of the mountain. But what do people do when they get to the top of the mountain? They put their feet up on the desk, they pour themselves a drink, they kick back, and they're like, hey, I made it. And what happens? 6 months, a year from now, boom, somebody passes them up. And they're like, wait a minute, what happened? What happened was you didn't sustain your excellence. You didn't find another market. You didn't find another product. You didn't find a way to be innovative in so I'd always want to be number two. Because what else can I do? That's number one. Okay, what else can we do? It would make me hungry to be number two, to be number three, to be number five, to be number 10, whatever. It would make me hungry. And the other thing I'll say about this, and I think this is incredibly important too, fear is a problem. And the other issue is you got to like the grind. You got to like the work. You got to like putting in the work. There's a podcast that I listen to called it's a Learning Leaders podcast. It's done by a guy by the name of Ryan Hawk. Ryan Hawk is the brother of AJ Hawk, who was a linebacker for the Green Bay Packers in the National Football League. But Ryan Hawk talks about people ask him, will you help me with my podcast? And he says, I ask them, why do you want to do a podcast? And if they tell me because I want to get more clients, or I want to be on bigger stages, or, because I want to have better marketing. He says, I won't work with them. Because what I want to know is, are you willing to put in the grind? Because Hawk talks about, for every hour of content I publish on my podcast, I put in 15 hours of work before it. Whether it's editing, whether it's reading their stuff, whatever it ends up being, I put in all this work so that I can have a great podcast. So if somebody doesn't say to him, will you help me? Because I love doing this, because I love the grind, because it's in me, he will help that person. If you're looking for some kind of esoteric thing out there to have him help you, he's not going to spend the time because he knows you're not going to follow through with it. Because as soon as something comes along that's shinier or more interesting, I'm not gonna do podcasts anymore. I'm gonna do this over here now. Oh, and then something else shinier came along. Now I'm gonna do that instead. You gotta love the grind. So fear and the and not willing to put in the work, I think, are probably the two biggest reasons why people don't get to where they want to be.
That shiny new coin gets their attention every time, right?
It does.
You mentioned fear. Fear I always found interesting because it could lead you to actually improve, like the fear of failure, right? Like, I don't want to be where I currently am, and I have a fear that I will die this way. I won't be able to provide for my family, maybe I won't be able to get what I want. But to your point, I think a lot of people use fear to say that I don't want to work hard, Terry. The fear of change, the fear of outside, the fear of getting better. What if I get better and I don't like the person I become? Or what if I get better and the people I have now, they're pretty cool. What if they don't want to be around me anymore because I'm putting in those extra 15 hours, 20 hours? As we close here, how can we help people find a balance between getting what they want and maybe still keeping a sense of themselves?
Yeah, I think you got to understand what's important in life. And again, well, I think we're going to bring it full circle to values. What do you value in life? And and I'm going to mess up this quote a little bit, but it's something like, if you don't understand or know your values, your default is always going to be, I want more money. Money is, or success, or how, whatever's going to get you more money. That's going to be my default. And Dorian, I've seen so many people in my life that feel they're born empty. And that when they get out of school and they get into life, whatever that looks like for them, that then their job is to fill up their empty self. I got to get the greatest job, make the most money, drive the nicest car, live in the nicest neighborhood, and have all the latest gadgets and gizmos. And what I found is, it's not that we're born empty. It's just the opposite. We're all born full with everything we need to be successful, however you define that word, already inside us. We just need to find it, pull it out, and use it to our benefit. So our purpose in life should not be to fill ourselves up, because we'll never be able to do that. There'll always be one more thing that we're chasing. Our purpose in life should be to empty ourselves out with our unique gifts and talents, certainly for the betterment of ourselves, but also for the betterment of our families, of our friends, and of our communities. And when you make that paradigm shift, when you change your thinking to, it's not what I can get, it's what I can give,